Okay, so let's dive in. We've got this really fascinating article, hot off the press, like just came out on March 19th, 2025.
Oh, wow. Very recent.
Yeah, and it's in, a pretty well-known journal, Teaching and Learning in Medicine, an international journal. So, you know, right up our alley.
Definitely.
And the title itself, Disrupting Health Professions Education Research, a guide to critical reflexive praxis during research planning. I mean, that's pretty attention-grabbing.
Right. Yeah, no,
And,
absolutely. Like, immediately it makes you think, disrupting.
yeah,
Okay, what's being disrupted and how?
exactly. And, especially for us, always thinking about how we educate future healthcare professionals.
Right, right.
One of the things that really jumped out at me reading this is this idea that research, especially in HPE, it's not this like neutral thing.
Yeah, you're always bringing your own baggage to it, aren't you? Like your background, where you're coming from.
It's all in the mix. And the systems you're part of, it's all shaping what you see, how you interpret things.
100%.
And so this article, they introduced this concept called critical reflexive praxis, CRP.
Okay, CRP, I've heard of reflexivity, right? Like reflecting on your research, but is this something different?
It takes it a step further, I'd say. It's like, yeah, you're reflecting, but you're also going deeper.
Deeper, okay.
You're questioning the power dynamics. Like who's got the power, who doesn't, and how does that affect everything?
Interesting.
And how do we make research, fairer, more equitable? So for our listeners, you guys are always eager to learn, right?
Always.
We're going to break this whole CRP thing down. What does it mean for HPE research specifically? We'll look at it from all these different angles, and hopefully there'll be some aha moments along the way, things that maybe you haven't thought about before.
Sounds good.
All of that, without getting too bogged down in the jargon.
Perfect.
So right off the bat, this article really challenges this idea that research is like purely objective, that we're just these neutral observers, whether we're crunching numbers, quantitative stuff, or we're exploring people's experiences, qualitative, the researcher's point of view, like what questions are they even asking?
Right.
That's already shaping things.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like the questions you choose to ask, they already limit what you're going to find, don't they?
And then how you make sense of the results, your interpretations, your biases, that's another layer.
That's all baked in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, here's where it gets really, I think, mind-blowing.
Okay.
The article talks about how what we even consider knowledge, what we think of as truth, especially in HPE, it's not just out there waiting to be discovered. It's not like some universal truth. It's socially constructed. Meaning like what we collectively agree on as a society, what we value is influenced by, our cultures, our societies, by power structures. Who gets to decide what counts?
That's a powerful point.
And this has huge implications for HPE research globally. Like when we think about those dominant theories, those practices that we often see as the gold standard.
The right way to do things.
Yeah. Well, the article's saying, hold on, those have been shaped by global power dynamics,
Okay, so there's this imbalance.
Huge imbalance. And they specifically talk about the divide between the global north, so, US, UK, Canada, those places, versus the global south.
Right, right. And the article even gives a statistic, doesn't it? Something about how much more research gets published from the global north.
Yeah, they say the output from the global north just like dwarfs what we see from the global south.
That's pretty stark.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about how much is getting published.
Right, there must be reasons for that.
Exactly. The article delves into some of the barriers, the cost of publishing in those big journals.
Oh, yeah. That can be prohibitive, can it?
Especially for researchers in countries where funding is, already scarce.
Makes sense.
And there's this perception sometimes that researchers from the global south are outsiders.
Oh, wow. Like their perspective isn't as valuable.
Yeah, like they're not part of the in crowd, Not at all. And then, there are the language barriers. A lot of pressure to publish in English.
Even if that's not your first language?
Exactly. And if you're using theories or methods that aren't, the norm in the West.
You might get side-eyed.
Yeah, like, is this really rigorous research?
It's all about fitting into the mold they've created, isn't it?
And let's not forget the advantage of having collaborators based in the global north. Like, that can really make a difference in getting published.
So it's like a whole system that favors certain researchers, certain perspectives.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. The article connects this all the way back to colonial history.
Colonialism, okay.
Yeah. They suggest that modern medicine And by extension, HPE research can be seen as colonial artifacts.
Well, okay, hold on. How so?
Because, during colonialism, Western medical knowledge was imposed as this, like, superior universal truth.
Right, right.
And local healing practices, indigenous knowledge often got dismissed, suppressed.
And the article's saying that's still playing out today.
Yeah, like we're still dealing with the legacy of that. Certain perspectives, certain approaches dominate. It's that West is best mentality.
Still lingering.
Yeah. We see it in the emphasis on positivist approaches, specific scientific theories, evidence-based practice, but like based on whose evidence?
Good point.
The biomedical model of health, It all goes back to that. And it raises this question of like whose knowledge is valued, whose knowledge is not.
Absolutely. And the article uses these terms, epistemological gatekeeping and epistemic violence.
Oh, yeah, those are powerful terms.
They are. What do you make of them?
So epistemological gatekeeping, to me, it's like there's this gate, right?
Oh.
And knowledge from the global south, it's often kept out.
It can't even get through the gate.
Or it gets through, but it's not given the same weight, the same credibility as knowledge from the north.
Right, like it has to prove itself more.
Exactly. And then epistemic violence, that sounds even like harsher.
Yeah, it's like actively harming someone through knowledge.
Yeah, it's the silencing, the suppression of ideas and perspectives from these regions, making them invisible.
Making it seem like they don't even exist.
Yeah. So, for anyone who's listening who's involved in HPE globally,
yeah.
Why should they care about this unequal playing field? Like, why does it matter?
Well, think about it. If we only have a limited set of voices contributing to research, to what we consider knowledge,
we're missing out on a lot.
Absolutely. And the knowledge we end up with, it's going to be biased. It's going to be incomplete. And the recommendations that come out of that research,
like best practices.
Exactly. They might not be relevant for everyone. They might not even be appropriate in different contexts.
That can actually lead to harm, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, think about it. If we're basing our teaching, our healthcare practices on research that's not representative of the whole world,
we could be doing more harm than good.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It can hinder innovation because we're not getting all the ideas. And it can perpetuate harmful practices.
So it's not just an academic issue. This has real-world consequences.
Very real consequences for education, for research, and ultimately for people's health.
That's why this idea of considering the geopolitics of knowledge in research is so important. Who's got the power? Whose interests are being served?
Right, right. It's not just about the science. It's about the power dynamics that shape the science.
And also individually being aware of our own epistemic locations. Like, where does my knowledge come from? Who am I prioritizing? Whose voices am I listening to?
Yeah, good point. We need to be critical of our own starting points, right? Where are we coming from, literally and figuratively?
Exactly. So the article argues that this critical reflexive praxis, CRP, it gives us a way to actually engage with all of this complexity.
Okay, so it's not just about pointing out the problems. It's about doing something about them.
Exactly. But they make a distinction between CRP and what a lot of researchers already do, which is just regular reflexivity.
Okay, so I reflect on my own biases, my assumptions, that kind of thing.
Right, which is good. But the article's saying it often stays at this surface level.
Surface level, okay. Like I check the box, but I don't go deeper.
Exactly. It becomes routine, And it doesn't really challenge the deeper power imbalances that are at play.
So CRP is about digging deeper.
Digging deeper and then taking action. It's not just reflecting. It's about doing something to change those power dynamics, to transform those systems that are causing these inequities.
Okay, so action-oriented. I like that.
Yeah. And the goal, ultimately, is to bridge that divide between the global north and south to create a more level playing field in research.
Right, to even things out.
They talk about epistemic reflexivity, being aware of where our knowledge comes from, its limitations.
Acknowledging that we don't have all the answers.
Then social reflexivity, thinking about the impact of our research on society.
Not just doing research in a vacuum.
And ultimately, emancipatory knowledge that can lead to positive social change.
Knowledge that actually makes a difference in the world.
And they even use this word resistance. But it's not just about resisting, being against something.
It's about resisting in a constructive way.
Yeah, it's about resisting those oppressive forces and actively working towards something better, being thoughtful, being proportionate, and rebuilding in a way that's equitable.
So there's a positive element to it.
Yeah.
It's not just tearing things down. It's about building something better in its place.
Exactly. So CRP is very much rooted in this broader framework called critical theory.
Critical theory, okay? I've heard that term thrown around, but I'm not always sure what it means.
Yeah, it's a big umbrella term. It encompasses a lot of different theories, like feminist theories, critical race theory, anti-colonial theories.
Oh, okay. So it's all about looking at power,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, at its core, it's about examining and challenging those social structures and systems of power that lead to inequality and injustice.
So, like, it's not just about individual bad actors. It's about the systems that allow those bad actors to flourish.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that the inequalities we see in the world, they're not just random. They're often the result of these power structures that have been around for a long time.
And critical theory gives us a way to analyze those structures,
Yeah.
right?
Like, they have a specific way of looking at reality, their ontology. They see it as shaped by these social, political, cultural, economic power dynamics.
So reality isn't neutral. It's already been molded by power.
And their epistemology, how they understand knowledge, it's not neutral either. Knowledge is always influenced by social and historical context, so certain perspectives get privileged.
Like we were talking about earlier with the global north and south.
Exactly. And then their axiology, their values, they're all about promoting fairness and equality, questioning those dominant power structures, valuing a wider range of voices.
So it's inherently political.
In a way, yes. And methodologically, they emphasize lived experiences, diverse voices, participatory approaches, actually involving the people you're researching with.
That makes sense.
So a critical theoretical perspective, it gives you this framework to see those bigger systemic issues, not just individual biases.
And that's where CRP comes in, right?
Exactly. So the article then goes on to break down how you can actually put CRP into practice.
Okay, good. Because it all sounds very theoretical so far. How do we actually do this?
Right. And they acknowledge it's not one size fits all. They talk about engaging in CRP at different levels, like ripples in a pool,
Ripples, okay.
Starting with the individual, then interpersonal, then your local context, and finally, the global context.
So it expands outwards.
Exactly. So at the individual level, it's about going deeper than just surface level reflexivity.
Okay, so not just checking the box.
Right. It's really examining your biases, your assumptions, your privileges, and then understanding like, okay, where did these come from?
What experiences have shaped how I see the world?
And then they ask this really powerful question.
What is it?
What kind of researcher do you want to be?
Oh, wow. So it's not just about who you are now, but who you aspire to be.
Exactly. It's about growth, transformation. They emphasize humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to learn and unlearn.
So it's an ongoing process.
Always. And practically, they suggest keeping a reflexive journal.
Oh, interesting.
Jotting down your thoughts, your insights as you go,
Okay.
having critical dialogues with colleagues, getting different perspectives.
Bouncing ideas off each other.
And then collaborative reflexivity, like intentionally seeking out people who have different viewpoints from you.
Challenging yourself.
Yeah. So then you move outward to the interpersonal level. This
Yeah.
is about your relationships with stakeholders, with the communities you're working with.
Okay, so the people who are actually affected by the research.
Exactly. And it's about building relationships based on respect, trust, accountability, reciprocity,
All the good stuff.
and being super aware of power imbalances. Like, who has more power in this relationship, and how do I minimize that?
Right, because you're always going to have some level of power as the researcher.
And it's about who's included, who's excluded, whose voices are being centered, whose voices are being silenced. What can you do to promote diversity and inclusivity?
So it's about really listening to the people you're working with, not just extracting information from them.
They emphasize valuing all voices, seeing participants as experts in their own lives.
Right, they're the experts on their own experiences.
And engaging with communities before you even finalize your research design. Like, what are their needs, their priorities? How can we co-create a project that benefits everyone?
So it's a truly collaborative process.
Ideally, yes. So they suggest building diverse research teams, distributing power within the team, having regular debriefings to talk about power dynamics, and always prioritizing the self-determination of your participants.
Giving them agency.
Yeah. So then we zoom out even further to the local contextual level. This is about grounding your research in the specific context where it's happening.
So taking into account the local culture, the history, the social and economic conditions.
Exactly. Integrating local knowledge, being aware of the potential impact of your research on the community.
And being really mindful of whether you're an insider or an outsider in that context.
Huge point. Because that shapes everything. And again, they emphasize stakeholder and community engagement, really understanding those cultural nuances so you can minimize harm.
Do no harm, right.
The goal here is to make sure your research benefits the local context first and foremost, and that it's done in a way that's participatory and culturally appropriate.
So it's tailored to the specific needs of the community.
And finally, we reach the global contextual level. Now we're thinking about those big global power dynamics that shape HPE research.
Like the stuff we were talking about earlier with the global North and South.
Exactly. And the goal here is to actively challenge those imbalances, to create a more equitable knowledge system globally.
So it's about recognizing that the way we do research right now, it often reinforces those existing power structures.
And they challenge researchers to think about, okay, how is my research engaging with these hierarchies? Am I perpetuating them or am I trying to disrupt them?
Am I amplifying marginalized voices?
And they caution against just blindly applying your favorite theories or methods.
Because those might be rooted in those same power structures.
Exactly. They challenge the assumption that indigenous approaches, critical theories, participatory methods, that those are somehow less rigorous.
Just because they're different.
They advocate for transparency in your methods, being open to different paradigms, promoting diversity and transformative outcomes.
So it's about challenging the status quo in research.
And there's a big emphasis on challenging those epistemic inequities. So reading, citing, collaborating with researchers from the global south, indigenous communities, marginalized groups.
Making sure those voices are heard.
Advocating for more equitable funding, capacity building initiatives for those communities. And being willing to do research that maybe isn't going to get you the big grant,
Research that's truly driven by the needs of the community.
So to give you a concrete example, the article uses the hidden curriculum in HPE.
Okay, the hidden curriculum, what is that exactly?
It's those unspoken lessons, those values, those norms that get transmitted in education, often without us even realizing it.
Ah, okay. So it's like you learn these things without them being explicitly taught.
Exactly. And it can perpetuate power imbalances.
Because it's often based on the dominant culture's norms.
And so the article shows how you can apply CRP to the hidden curriculum at each level.
Okay, so at the individual level, what would that look like?
Individually, it's reflecting on how the hidden curriculum might be giving you certain privileges.
And shaping my assumptions about what good teaching, good practice looks like.
Interpersonally, it's examining your relationships with colleagues, with trainees, and how those might be reinforcing hierarchies.
Through those unspoken norms.
Locally, it's reflecting on the assumptions the hidden curriculum makes about different groups in your specific context.
And how that might be impacting marginalized communities more severely.
And globally, it's examining how policies, funding priorities, might be reinforcing those global power hierarchies through the hidden curriculum.
And silencing certain perspectives on a larger scale.
And the article highlights how research that centers marginalized voices, it's been crucial in exposing the harmful effects of the hidden curriculum.
So it's about using research as a tool to expose these hidden power dynamics and hopefully change them.
Exactly. So the authors wrap up by acknowledging that tackling these global knowledge hierarchies, it can feel daunting.
Yeah, it's a huge task.
But they emphasize that ignoring them just lets those inequities continue.
So we have to try, even if it's hard.
CRP, they argue, it's not just a thought experiment. It's a commitment to equity, justice, and inclusivity in HPE research.
It's about putting those values into action.
Moving beyond just thinking about it to actually doing something.
And that doing part is key.
It's challenging us as researchers to really examine who holds the power, whose voices are being excluded, and how we can make research a force for equity.
Rather than a tool for oppression.
And it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. It requires humility, what they call civil courage.
Being brave enough to speak truth to power.
And a commitment to lifelong learning and unlearning. Asking those tough questions, having those critical dialogues, taking action, even if it's small.
It's a journey.
So as we finish up this deep dive into CRP, here's a final thought for our listeners.
Okay, what is it?
Think about your own field of interest, your own research. Are there similar imbalances happening there?
Maybe even without us realizing it.
And how can you apply these principles of CRP to make your research more equitable, more inclusive?
That's something we all need to be thinking about.
Food for thought.